in the fall. Brother Ruckman and I preached that and had a great time down here then, and so glad to be back. Brother Haley, your pastor, called and a few weeks ago, he called and asked if we had anybody that could fill in today because he was going to be out of town, and we have a couple of interns there this summer. Then we also have an assistant pastor there this summer, but today we actually have a visiting preacher, a guest preacher all day, and so I called him back last week and said, hey, how would it be okay if I came? And because we've got our pulpits covered, and so he said that'd be great. If they really appreciate you doing that. So I'm glad to be here. Good to be here and be with you, and hope that this will be a help to you this morning. We're going to be in Luke 11. Somebody tell me, so it's Elk Point, okay? And are there elk around here? I mean, where's the name come from?
Lewis and Clark, when they came through, they saw a lot of elk. And this was where they had the first, like an election? They were electing a leader west of the Mississippi, something like that.
Okay. So there used to be elk around here somewhere. Okay. I was wondering about that. Okay, Luke 11. I don't know why that's awkward and random, but just wondering. I haven't seen a lot of elk in South Dakota. My wife and I, our family, moved up here from Oklahoma 2 years ago, and so we've survived 2 winters, and I think that's a pretty big deal. So, especially coming from Oklahoma, and my wife's a California girl and was raised in California, so this was a big culture shock for our family. But we do love South Dakota. We're enjoying it up here, and thankful to be here. So Luke 11 is where we're going to be this morning. And by the way, I want to mention too, Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. And I'll be preaching a Father's Day related message the next hour. And grateful for my dad and grateful for all the dads in the room here this morning. Luke 11, verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass that as he was praying in a certain place, when he ceased, one of his disciples said unto him, Lord, teach us to pray, as John also taught his disciples. And he said unto them," of course this is Jesus Christ, "when you pray, say, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so in earth. Give us day by day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we also forgive everyone that is indebted to us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." And we could focus this morning, that whole lesson, we could look at the prayer of Jesus Christ. And wow, these guys are fast. They already got the verses up there and everything. What I really want to do, though, this morning is focus mostly on verse 1. And because really, if we were to do a study on the Lord's Prayer, it would take us weeks. We could go through that, but it'd take us a long time. But I really want to focus on the question, Luke 11:1, when it says that the disciples came and they said, Lord, teach us to pray. Prayer might be the most underestimated part of the Christian life. Think about all the things that we consider marks of being a good Christian. What are some things that you might consider this is a mark of a good Christian? What are the things that come to your mind? Church attendance, absolutely. What else? What is it? Kindness. Yep, that's great. What else? What other marks, outward marks, do you consider to be a mark of a good Christian? Witnesses, absolutely. Yes, what else? Keeping God's commandments, obedience, right. And we could all come up with a long list, especially if you've been doing it very long at all. Church, I had listed here, church attendance, separation, witnessing, serving in the church. I mean, all of those things are the kind of things we think about. They're all extremely important, and they're helpful to indicate where a Christian is in their walk with God, or if it is a Christian, But if you consider each of the things that we mentioned, they all have something in common in that they can all be seen. They are all what I would call those public markers. And don't get me wrong, it's not bad to have external evidence to prove that you're a child of God. It's right. You ought to have external public markers to reveal that you're a child of God. The problem, though, lies in our thinking about the public markers, meaning that we often lean on those when we measure our Christianity. We often lean on the things that you can see to say, okay, well, that means that I'm a good Christian or I'm doing well. We look to the visible things as the indicators of how serious and how committed we are to Jesus Christ. And I do believe that they provide some evidence, but our Christian life goes much deeper simply than what we do. And you know this. I'm talking to you. You're the faithful ones here. You're the core. But we have a tendency to walk by sight. The Bible tells us that we ought not walk by sight, and the fact that it has to say that means it's an issue. So we assume that the things that can be observed are the most important things, but that's faulty thinking for a Christian. Our Christian life doesn't begin in public. And I think that the question or the request of the disciples here in Luke 11 provides some insight into what things matter the most. When Jesus called his disciples and to follow him, he was literally asking them to become students. That's what the word disciple means. It's a learner, it's a student, a pupil. And they did plenty of learning, and he taught them many truths that changed and formed their thinking, but that's not all they watched him do. You know, the crowds that came to see Jesus, they saw him do all the things in public, and the disciples saw that too. They saw the miracles, they watched him heal people, and the things that really blew their minds, things they'd never seen before. And so if I was to put myself in this situation right here in Luke chapter 11, and I had the opportunity to ask Christ to teach me to do something, I might have said something like, Lord, teach me to walk on water. Lord, can you teach me? I mean, we were just yesterday, we were coming back from camp. We just took our young people to camp in Tennessee this year. And so we had a long trip back, and we had a lot of time to talk. And the kids mostly slept while us drivers, were downing 5-hour energies and caffeine the whole time, trying to stay awake. And so the young people, inevitably every single time, if you're around teenage guys, you know this is true. If the conversation, it usually will at some point turn to superheroes. And the question will be posed, if you could have one superpower, what would it be? That's the kind of stuff, I don't know what girls talk about. That's the kind of stuff guys talk about. The girls are talking about, I don't know what they talk about. I have 4 daughters, and then my wife, and then we have a dog. She's a girl too. My son and I are very outnumbered, okay? And still I don't know what they talk about when they go on trips, but boys, guys will talk about superhero powers. So it turned to it, it started with what superhero would you be if you could be one, and then it turned into what superpower would you have if you could have one. And, so it always, goes to one or the other. Usually it's I want to fly, or I'd like to be Flash, or I could run fast, or, telekinesis always comes up for some reason. It's just, I don't even know if they know what the word means. They can say it, so they do. But, those are the kinds of things we like to think about. Well, I think that mentality would have affected me if I had been the one there with Jesus and saying, Lord, would you teach me something? Would you teach me how to fly? Because I think that would be really cool to fly. Or would you teach me how to do something big? I mean, I want to walk on water. I'd like to be able to heal somebody. I'd like to raise a dead person back to life. I want to do something public. I want a public marker. And I'm kind of glad that I wasn't around in Luke 11, because I may have embarrassed myself with what I asked for. Of all the things Jesus can do, I may have asked myself for something that might have embarrassed me. And in some ways, it kind of reminds me of Solomon. Solomon in 1 Chronicles, where God said, you can have anything. What do you need? And Solomon, instead of asking for the riches, and instead of asking for all the notoriety and the fame, what did Solomon ask for? Do you remember? He asked for wisdom. And that's a very similar mindset to what the disciples see here, is that Solomon knew all those other things wouldn't matter at all if he didn't, with God's help, know how to rule the kingdom. And the disciples see something in Jesus' life that lets them know, listen, it's the public things that Jesus does. Those are based on something that he does not just in public, but something he's doing in private. And see, God is looking for followers who place an emphasis on a private relationship over public showmanship. Private relationship over public showmanship. Solomon got to experience it. The disciples were, their question or their request is evidencing it here. And now, like everybody, they had seen Jesus' power, and the crowds were all into what Jesus could do. But no one except them saw what Jesus was doing behind the closed doors. You see, they, like his followers, they didn't just see the miracles, they saw the downtime, meaning they linked his public markers. They linked the things that he was doing in public to the things he was doing in private, and they were linking his public markers to his private practices. They knew there was a connection between what he did in front of the multitudes and what he did when no one was watching. They had seen him heal the sick, and they had seen him produce food for 5,000 plus. And then they'd also, though, seen him retreat into private and spend sometimes hours and even maybe a day in prayer. You know, they saw those. They saw his dependency on the Father, and they knew he was the Son of God, and yet they still saw how dependent he was on his Father for all that he was doing. They saw that, and so when they could have asked for a superpower, they instead said, we see the strength of your walk with your Father, your relationship with your Father behind closed doors. So of all the things you could teach us, would you teach us to pray? They knew that private prayer equals public power. Anything that you can do in public as a Christian will be ineffective unless it's done in God's power. And according to the disciples here in Luke 11, they knew there was a connection between God's power and a person's prayer life. And if Jesus leaned on prayer to do the work of God, how can we assume that we don't need to lean on prayer to do the work of God? Prayer is necessary and important, but it seems like the things that are the most necessary and the most important are also the most difficult. At least that's the way it seems to me. We have a Bible full of evidence telling us to pray and explaining the benefits of prayer and how vital it is to our Christian lives and in empowering us in the work of God, but it's just not easy. Well, why is that? Well, I think it's hard because maybe we misunderstand it. We assume it's something that it's not. See, prayer is spiritual discipline. The word discipline, now when I start talking about discipline, people don't just get all excited about that. Okay, that's not the kind of thing that people, it's just not one of those exciting subjects. Discipline, you know why? Because discipline is hard. It's like exercise. And you want to do it, but your body doesn't want to do it. And my wife and I, we try to get out, and we've been trying to really get into running. We have in times been into jogging, and we go down to the bike trail there in Sioux Falls. It goes along the river, and it's a nice place to run. And but Sioux Falls winters have not been good to me. You know, we came from Oklahoma, and it's just milder year round, and you can be outside a lot more, and boy, it's hard. And especially when things start to thaw out here and it's time to get back into it, it's not easy. I mean, it takes work. It takes a decision to be tough, and you're going to get sore, and it's going to be hard. You've got to get back into it. Well, prayer is like that. Prayer is discipline. And what most people misunderstand is about prayer is that it's not an effect, it's a cause. Meaning is that there are certain things that we experience that are evidences of something else. For instance, in the book of Galatians, it talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Okay, what are the fruits of the Spirit? Do you remember? Give me some of them. Gentleness, yes, you got to memorize. That's right. Love, joy, peace, gentleness, long-suffering, goodness, temperance, those kinds of things. Now, those are fruits, meaning that those are evidences that a person is walking in the Spirit of God. Galatians 5:16 says, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. So love and joy and peace and gentleness and goodness and faith and long-suffering and all of those, they are fruit of walking in the Spirit. If you walk in the Spirit, those things will just be evident. They will happen. You can't force them. If you walk in the Spirit, they will happen naturally. An apple tree doesn't make itself grow. I mean, it doesn't. It doesn't just make itself produce fruit. No, it's the product of a seed planted in good soil with the right nutrients, with the right amount of water, and the right amount of sunlight. An apple tree produces fruit in the right conditions. Prayer is not listed as a fruit of the Spirit. So if you think, well, I've been a Christian for a long time, and I've been walking in the Spirit, and I'm doing the things I should, and I'm waiting for the day that prayer just happens naturally. Well, there's no evidence in the Bible that prayer will ever really just happen. It's not a fruit of the Spirit. It's not something that you will just accidentally wake up and you're like, wow, I'm praying right now. I didn't even know that was happening. I mean, you might just pray because it's a habit, but it is not just one of those things that will ever get to the place where it just happens to us. It's not listed as a fruit. Prayer is not a fruit, it's a commandment. Philippians 4:6, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known unto God. It's a commandment. 1 Thessalonians 5:17, pray without ceasing. 1 Timothy chapter 2 says, I exhort therefore that first of all supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men. Jeremiah 33:3, call unto me and I will answer thee and give thee and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. Matthew 26, watch and pray. James 5:16, pray for another. We have to be told to pray and how to pray. And here's why. Because prayer is not a fruit to be displayed. It's a command to be obeyed. It's not a fruit to be displayed. It's a command to be obeyed. Joy and peace happen when we walk in the Spirit. You can't force them. I mean, as much as I want to have joy, I can't just mind over matter make myself have joy. Joy comes as I walk in the Spirit. Prayer is not like that. Prayer is a decision that I make. It's a choice that I make. We discipline ourselves to pray. And it's hard, and it's strenuous, and it's work, and we may not feel like it, but we must obey. Like exercise, we must decide that we will not stop just because it gets hard. We have to decide that we won't quit just because it seems like nothing's happening. I mean, right here, even in Luke 11, look at how Jesus describes prayer in verse 5. It says, which of you shall have a friend and shall go unto him at midnight and say unto him, friend, lend me 3 loaves, which that seems a little presumptuous, right? In the middle of the night, you couldn't just wait till the morning, but for a friend of mine in his journey has come to me, and I have nothing to set before him, and he from within shall answer and say, this about would be my answer, trouble me not. My door is now shut, and my children are with me in bed. I cannot rise and give thee. And in that culture, they would have likely all been sleeping in the same room, just because of the way that the houses were in that culture. And so for him to get up and try to get bread and step over his children and, potentially step on Legos in the middle of the night like we do at our house. My son's a big Lego fan, and there's nothing more painful than a Lego when you're on your bare feet in the middle of the night. And so he says, I can't get up right now. And I say unto you, though he will not rise and give him because he is his friend, yet because of his importunity, persistence, he will rise and give him as many as he needed. And I say unto you, ask and it shall be given you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. If a son shall ask bread of any of you that is a father, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he for a fish give him a serpent? Or if he shall ask an egg, will he offer him a scorpion? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your heavenly Father give the Holy Spirit to them that ask him? And the idea there is that importunity, that persistence is required. I mean, if you don't just try it once and then it doesn't have the effect that you thought, and so now you're done and you're moving forward. No, that's what it means to be disciplined. You have importunity, you have persistence to work through something until it's complete. And here's why we must obey to the end in prayer. Is if you rely on life experience, all you will get is what your life experience can get you. And some of you have a lot of life experience. And you've got a lot of experience in different areas. And if I needed advice, I'm not a mechanic. If I needed advice on how to fix my car, there are probably some guys in here I would call. If your life experience and your knowledge is a help to you, but let's be honest,
Your life experience, if you rely on your life experience to live your life, all you'll ever have is what your life experience has to offer. And is there anybody in here would say, I have unlimited experience? There's no question I won't be able to answer. Yeah, no. There may be some people who think that, but it's not true. As good as education is, some of you are very educated. Probably we have some in here with at least college degrees or advanced degrees. I have a master's degree. I don't feel any smarter than I did before I got my master's degree. I'll just say that. That master's degree is very limited. Meaning that all a master's degree gives me, all I'll ever have if I rely on my master's degree, or if I rely on education, all I'll have is what my education can offer. And that's limited, very limited. Some people in here are very talented. And you've developed your talent. Listening to the piano this morning, and you've got different talents and different things that you're good at, but we'll never be the most talented people in our field. We have a limitation in talent. Our talents are limited, and our abilities eventually fade. And I'm thankful for the advancements of something like healthcare, but even doctors don't have all the answers. I don't know if you knew that or not, but they don't. I like technology, and I see technology here. We use technology in our services. I like technology. I think it's interesting, and it can enhance ministry, but it can't actually touch somebody's need at the point where their heart really needs something ministering to them. Healthcare is good, doctors are good, but a doctor can't fix a heart problem. And what I'm trying to point out is that we have all of these things in these areas that we rely on and depend on, and all of these things, they have their advantages, but all you get is what they offer. Meaning it comes to a point where healthcare has a limit, and where technology has a limit, and where education has a limit. It doesn't go any deeper, but listen, here's why we need to be fervent and have importunity when it comes to prayer, and be disciplined and choose, is because with prayer, you get all that God offers, which means there's no limit. So we can be dependent on education, and we can be dependent on talent, and we can be dependent on charisma and personality, and we can be dependent on all of these things that are good, and they have their advantages. But the reason that we should decide today that the one thing we'll depend on life for is prayer is because when you pray, you get all that God has to offer, and there's no limit to that. If there's ever been a motivation to pray, it should be the fact that there's no limit to God. Listen, the most important things depend on what God can do. The saving of a soul. It depends on what God can do. Bringing a backslidden person, and maybe somebody's on your mind, that's somebody that you love that's far away from God. And listen, education and technology and those things, those are great, but they cannot reach a heart of a person who's far away from God. Only God can do that. Restoring relationship with a family member that maybe you've been at odds for a long time, and you haven't spoken in a long time. Only God can fix that. Forgiving a wrong. That is a supernatural work in our lives to show forgiveness. When Jesus was talking about forgiveness, and he said, when you forgive, you should forgive 7 times, and you should forgive and show compassion. And the disciples said, this is impossible. Increase our faith is what they said. Because they knew that forgiveness is hard, and forgiveness is hard. So they said, increase our faith, and Jesus said, well, you don't need more faith. If you just had faith of a mustard seed, you could move a mountain. He said, it's not how much faith you have. I heard a preacher say this week. It's not how much faith you have, it's who your faith is in. The object of your faith. Because he knew, and the disciples knew, and they all felt it. Forgiving somebody that's wronged me would have to come from somebody outside of me. But if you are trusting in your experience or in your diplomacy or in something in you, you will not be able to forgive because it's supernatural work. And you need God's help to help you with forgiveness. You need God's power in your services here at Elk Point Baptist Church. If you rely on technology and the skill of the musicians and the charisma of your great pastor who's a great preacher. And I love to hear Brother Haley preach.
But listen, if God's power is not present in the services at Elk Point Baptist Church, all you'll have is what talent can bring and what a good orator can bring and what technology can bring. And your God will not be able then to step in and work
beyond that because you're depending on something else. Your spiritual growth in your life and revival and
this church making a difference in the kingdom. Those things are dependent on God. So
to connect how we started then this morning, the things that can be seen in public are only enabled in so much as we take care of the things that we do in private. All the things that we want that God provides start in our private lives. Public power is the result of private prayer. Private prayer is the result of disciplined obedience, just choosing, I'm going to be a person of prayer. The disciples saw the connection and they asked Jesus Christ how to pray. They said, of all the things we could ask you, yeah, it'd be cool to fly. It'd be cool to walk on water. It'd be really neat to be able to do that. But listen, we know that if we're going to do the things that you want us to do and the things in public that make the biggest difference in people's lives, we have to have our private world ordered. And I can't just go and do the public markers. I have to have private practices. Who are we to think that we can bypass the important things we do in private and have any kind of effectiveness in the things that are visible? Our public success begins with private discipline. But private discipline begins with the choice. It doesn't just happen. Fruit won't be displayed until that command, prayer, has been obeyed. So I'm asking you this morning, how's your obedience in the discipline of prayer? Because the truth is, I want to make it. I want to make a big difference. I want to make a difference in people's lives, and I want to see lives change. And I want to be not for my credit, for the glory of God. I want people. We took a group of young people to camp, and every one of them, I have a vision for what God could do with their lives, and I want it to happen. I mean, my own children. I've got 4 girls, and my son, he's 8, our youngest, and I want all of them to make a difference for God. But I can't make it happen in my own life experience. And I could set things up for them and discipline them and train them and make everything happen the way it's supposed to. But if God's not involved in the process, my kids will probably just be good kids, but I can't guarantee that they're going to be godly kids. I need God to be involved in that process. And therefore, that increases my dependence on private practices. I don't just want them to be public either. I don't just want my children to have public markers and go through the motions. I want it to be real, but it starts in private. So how's your obedience in the discipline of prayer? Do you skip the private relationship and jump directly to public showmanship? I mean, it's easy if you've got a position and you teach and you help and you're out winning souls or door knocking and you're doing things in the church and you're serving. That's good, but it's easy. Can we all admit it's easy to just be to have public showmanship and skip what happens in private? I mean, the Pharisees did it, and they were usually the target of Jesus Christ's harshest criticism and messages. Just closing questions. If that's the case, then you're skipping the private practices, jumping to public showmanship. If that's the case, then you're doing what you do without the power of God. And if that's the case, boy, it is time to say, no, listen, I am tired of just having all that I can get with my own self. I want what God can bring. Don't wait for prayer to get easier. I mean, it's a command, and it requires discipline, and we must just obey it, even when we don't feel like it. And as you do, that private practice will result in public power. So my encouragement to you this morning is like the disciples. Lord, teach us to pray. I mean, of all the things we could ask for, I mean, there's some things I could ask for. We all have burdens. We all have things that are weighing on us this morning and things that, boy, I wish were different. But maybe those things would have been solved a long time ago if we had gone back to the root question or request, which is, Lord, just teach me to pray. Because all the things that are falling apart in these areas might actually come together if I would get my private practices in order. Prayer is the superpower behind the Christian life. And of all the things that we could do, it should be at the very top of our list of the things that we start with. Amen. And I hope that you haven't forgotten that. I mean, it is absolutely essential. And our private practices determine our public markers. Let's go in that order. And let's maybe fix some of the things that we've gotten out of order because we're just human and we go through the motions and we've been doing it a long time. And some of us have been saved long enough and working and serving long enough that in our experiences we could almost just go through the motions and nobody ever know. But I don't know about you. I don't want to live that way. So maybe it's time to flip the script and go back to where we ought to be. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the time together.